Hello, everyone. Hi, everybody. Welcome to our first breakout session. Okay, our breakout session is the rise of dependency of API, a HappySoup story. Hope that you guys have a great session until now for all the sessions that we attend. I hope that you really enjoy it. Okay, so let me just introduce my speaker. Okay, his name is Pablo Gonzalez, and basically he's a lead Salesforce engineer in Wired software in Iron. Okay, so Paulo has been in the Salesforce ecosystem for about 10 years, and he has done many other roles. So when he's not working, he uses all the experience to work on this product called HappySoup.io, which he will be introducing to you. So without any further ado, let me just welcome and a round of applause, a virtual round of applause for Paulo. Thank you, guys.
Hello there. Welcome to Seed Dreaming. My name is Pablo Gonzalez, and you can find me at github.com/pgonzalesnetwork. So today I'm going to talk to you about the rise of the Dependency API, a HappySoup story. But first, I want to thank our sponsors for making this event possible. Now, the agenda for today is we're going to talk about what HappySoup is, or also known as HappySoup.io. Then we're going to talk about the metadata component dependency, which is also known as the Dependency API. Then we're going to talk about the limitations of that API. And finally, we're going to talk about how to make those limitations go away. So what is HappySoup.io? It's essentially a free, open source, and community-led product that allows for impact analysis, the kind of where is this used functionality that you know for custom fields. So if I want to see where a custom field is used, or where an email template is used, or how many references I have to an Apex class, HappySoup can help with that. It also allows for dependency analysis, which is a little different from impact analysis, and this ties in with deployment boundaries, a concept that HappySoup introduces to the Salesforce ecosystem, which I'll explain in a few minutes. And lastly, it also allows for you to see field utilization so that you can see how much a field is used in your actual data. But this will all make a lot more sense if I show you a demo. So HappySoup.io goes, we need to go to this URL, and you can here log in with a sandbox or with production environment, or you can also specify my domain. In this case, I'm just going to log into my production environment. And there you go. So we are on the impact analysis tab, and this is where we can see where a piece of metadata is used. And again, this is all free, it's all open source, and we're going to see that code later on. So I'm going to go here to custom field, and I'm going to see where one of my fields is used. And I'm going to select these two options, which I'll explain in a few minutes. So once I click on custom fields, this is going to load all the fields in the org, and I can quickly look for any of the custom fields by the name. So I'm going to click on this customer priority from the account object, and I want to see where it is used. So it'll take a few minutes just trying to find all those dependencies for you, but it'll just take a few seconds and then it'll all be really nice. Okay, so we know very quickly that this custom field is used by 23 metadata items. That means that it is of high impact. Any change to this field could have an impact on these 23 metadata items. We can see very quickly that this includes Apex classes, page layouts, other custom fields, maybe formula fields, workflow field updates, workflow rules, and even some records from custom metadata types. I can also see the information very quickly on a table view, and I can also see a chart representation so that I can very quickly see which of the metadata types will mostly be impacted by any change on this field. So if we go back to that preview and I click expand, we can see that there's a lot of detail that we provide here. For example, When it comes to Apex classes, HappySoup will tell you how the class is actually used in the field. For example, is the field being used for writing data into it, or is the field being used just for reading, maybe if-else statements? This is actually very useful because just knowing that a field is used in a class is not enough. You need to understand if maybe that class is responsible for certain data that appears in that field, or if it's a pick list value that you're going to change. You need to be aware if changing or renaming that value is going to invalidate an if-else operation, which would be a read operation. So this level of detail is very important. Then when it comes to workflow rules, we can see also a lot of information, for example, the type of workflow rule, or like under which conditions this workflow rule fires, whether it's active or deactivated. And when it comes to flows as well, we get more information. For example, we can see if these flows are actually flows or process builders. And that's because process builders use the same metadata type behind the scenes as flows. So if I just show this flow here, you wouldn't know what we're talking about here, but HappySoup gives you more information so that you know exactly what you're dealing with. And it'll also tell you if this is a draft version, maybe an invalid draft, or active one. So you know these ones are the most important ones. Other things you can do with HappySoup is you can see field utilization. So for example, you can see that this field is populated on 87% of the records in the org. And you can see that broken down by record type. This way, if you see that a record type only has very few records with that field populated, you know maybe there's a problem going on with that business unit who uses that record type. Other things you can do with HappySoup is bulk impact analysis. So for example, if you want to do impact analysis on multiple fields at the same time, you can do that. You can even mix and match. For example, if you want to do also impact analysis on a few Apex classes at the same time as doing impact analysis on those fields, you can also do that. So let's just do a few here. Then you just click on where they are used. So now we're trying to do impact analysis on all these items at the same time. Where are they all used? So there you have it. You have a long list of entries there. And then the next concept that is important in HappySoup is the deployment boundary. So the deployment boundary is essentially all the metadata items that a component needs in order to exist. And if you think about what that means, let's look at an Apex class. So I'm going to pull one of my classes here. And I'm going to click on show deployment boundary. So what this is going to do is it's going to show me what this class uses. So we're no longer seeing where the class is used, but instead, what does it use? And so I can see that the Apex class uses 3 custom fields, 3 custom objects, and 3 Apex classes. But guess what? Those classes also have things that they use. For example, this Apex class of select metadata extension also uses 3 custom fields and another Apex class on its own, which then uses yet more fields and more classes. So essentially what you're seeing here is the entire dependency tree. Everything that you see here needs to exist in the org in order for this top level component to exist, either because it references these classes indirectly or these classes references other items as well. So the reason this is called a deployment boundary is because if you're working with Scratch orgs and you have a brand new empty org, let's say that you wanted to do some development on this metadata item. You could not just copy paste the code from your source org into your Scratch org. It just wouldn't work because this class needs a lot of things before it can actually exist. But because you have the deployment boundary, you can actually retrieve this from your source org and deploy it to your Scratch org as a pre-deployment step, kind of like preloading the org. And once you preload the org with all this boundary here, then you can actually copy paste this class and it'll save in one go, because as far as this class is concerned, it has everything it needs to exist. It doesn't even know that it's not in the original org. And so this is also, or this is one of the most powerful features of HappySoup. So all these features here, impact analysis, bulk impact analysis, and deployment boundaries are powered by the metadata component dependency. And that's what we're going to talk about next. So the metadata component dependency basically represents the relationship between two metadata items. Also, this is known as the Dependency API, but it's actually an object of the tooling API, and the official name is metadata component dependency. It's also been in beta for a while. Now, the way it looks like is essentially an object that you can query using the tooling API. So let's say that I want to see where this field is used. So there are two sets of fields in this object that are important to understand. The first set is the one that has ref as a prefix. So ref metadata component ID, ref metadata component name, and ref metadata component type. This represents that which is being used or that which is being referenced. So if I want to see where a custom field is referenced or where it is used, I need to get the ID of that custom field and get the records from this object where the reference metadata ID is the ID of the custom field. The next set of fields are the ones that don't have that prefix. And this represents the ID, the name, and the type of those metadata items that are referencing that field or that are using that field. So if I execute this query in the tooling API, I will get this result. And you see that I've divided this in the same two sets that I showed on the previous slide. So the first set here in orange is that which is being used, which in this case, it's all the same. It's all the field customer priority, which is the same field that I showed earlier. And the second set here in red is the items that are actually using that field. And we get their ID, their name, and what type it is. So we can see that there are some layouts that are using that field, some custom fields using it, some classes, and some flows as well. Now, there are some limitations to this API. So let's say the first one here, when you look at this page layout names, that's not the actual full name of the page layout. The page layout name is usually object dash and then the name. So this should actually be account dash account layout, but that part is missing. The same happens for custom fields. If you see custom fields should actually have this format, object name that field name _ C. Yet here we only get the raw name. We don't even get the object that it belongs to, and we don't get the _ C. And you might think, why is this relevant? Well, it is relevant because if you want to do anything with this data, maybe with the metadata API or with the tooling API, you need the fully qualified names of these items. Another thing is that when it comes to Apex classes, it doesn't tell you what I showed you earlier. It doesn't tell you if the classes are reading data from the field or inserting data into the field. And then when it comes to flows, again, it doesn't show you if these flows are actually process builders. Are they flows? What type of flows there are? And what about their version? Are they active? Are they inactive? Is it a draft? And you'll also notice that there are some missing items. In HappySoup, I was able to show you workflow rules, workflow field updates, sharing rules, and other things. So all of these things are actually not supported by the API, and what is supported has limitations in terms of the details that Salesforce provides to you. So really the goal of this presentation is to show how you take this API and then make it something much better, right? How do you start on this foundation and you end up in something so valuable as the impact analysis from HappySoup, where you can see workflow rules, field updates, flows, etc. So to do that, I'm gonna actually show you what the code looks like. And so for that, I'm gonna give the example of how do we find workflow field updates. So how do I know that this field is being used by this workflow field update if the API doesn't provide that? So I'm going to click on the workflow field update here, and I'm going to use the Salesforce Inspector, which is my favorite tool out there for metadata management. And I'm going to click here on show all data. So this is actually how I started building HappySoup. I started going through those dependencies that I realized were not supported. I started using the Salesforce Inspector to inspect their metadata and then trying to figure out how can I get those dependencies myself. So here we can see, if we go back to the field update, we see that it's using the customer priority field and it's called field to update. So the dependency is clearly there. Now, if we go to the actual tooling API representation, we see that the field in question is being referenced here, account that, and then the ID. If I take this ID here and I paste it here, that's going to be the ID of the custom field. Okay, so that's how it's referenced. We also see it here under field, but you'll notice that the object name is not there. So this is not enough for me to do a match because multiple fields could have the same name across different objects. So really, this is my best guess. If I can find workflow field updates that have this string as the field definition ID, then I know that I would be getting those field updates that update that field in question. Another challenge here is that this ID is actually the 15-digit ID of the custom field. And the API here actually returns the 18-digit one, the metadata component dependency. So I also need to do a little bit of work on that. Okay, so HappySoup is written in JavaScript, and it's actually a Node.js module. So I'm going to show here the core module, where we have this usage module as well. And this is where we say, okay, I want to see where this is used. That's why it's called the usage API. So the entry point is that which we want to know where it is used. The entry point will be the custom field in question. So the first thing I do is I do a usage query, which is essentially a query to the metadata component dependency, just like I showed you earlier. So I say, give me everything that this field, everything where this field is being used, filtering by the field ID. But I know that's not enough, right? So I have a method here that allows me to tell if this metadata type lacks dependency API support. In this case, I know that the custom field lacks support because, again, it doesn't show workflow rules, doesn't show workflow field updates. So I have tagged this field as such that it lacks dependency API support. So if it lacks dependency API support, then I'm going to search for additional references. Now, these additional references are searched by calling a dynamic module here that is going to match the metadata type of that which I want to find. In this case, what I want to find is references to the custom field. So here under metadata types, there's a custom field module, and this is specifically created to find additional references to custom fields. And at the time of this recording, this includes workflow rules, field updates, metadata type records, and Conga queries. So let's see how do we find workflow rules. The first thing I need to do is I need to get that format that I showed you earlier that is used in the workflow field update, which is account.15-digit ID. And if it was a custom object, it would actually be the ID of that custom object and then the ID of that custom field, right? That's what I showed you right here. So in order to get that, I need to query using the tooling REST API. I need to query the custom field object using the ID of the field and get the entity definition ID. Once I have the entity definition ID and the short ID, which is the 15-digit ID, I can pass those details to this formula, sorry, to this function here to find workflow field updates. And what does that look like? Well, it's actually pretty easy. I just need to query the workflow field update object from the tooling API, and I say, get me all the workflow field updates where the field definition ID equals that definition ID that I just got. And that's it. Now, finding workflow rules is a little bit more complicated. So for workflow rules, the first thing we do is I find all the workflow rules that belong to the object that the field belongs to. So in this case, the field belongs to the account object. So I know that if there's a workflow that uses that field, that workflow will be on the object that the field belongs to. So the first thing I do is I tell Salesforce, give me all the workflow rules that are based off of this object. Now, once I have those workflow rules, I actually don't know if they are using the field or not. And the tooling API doesn't give me that information by default. I actually need to then use the metadata API's read metadata function to expand the metadata of these workflow rules or to describe what these workflow rules look like. So once I have the workflow rule metadata, I can iterate over all of them and then look at the workflow rule and say, okay, is a workflow rule using a formula as a criteria? If it is, then I check if the formula includes the field name. And if it does, then I say, or I know that this workflow rule is using that field. Now, if the workflow rule is actually using a criteria as opposed to a formula, then I go through all the criteria items, and if one of the fields in the criteria match the name of the field, then I also know that the workflow rule is using the field in question. And that's essentially the case for most of the objects as well. A very good example that I like about HappySoup is finding email templates. Because where I work, we actually reference email templates sometimes in custom settings or custom labels. And if you think about it, you can reference a an email template pretty much by anything you want. You can do it by ID, you can do it by the API name of that email template, and you can also do it by the label of that template. So let's see what that looks like here. There you go. So we know that that email template is being used in 2 workflow email alerts and in 3 custom labels. And in this case, this custom label is using the email template by its ID. Salesforce will never find this dependency for you, but HappySoup can. And the reason is, again, there is an email template module here where I essentially query the external string object, which is the same as a custom label. And I say, find me all the custom labels that reference, or sorry, where the value is either the name of the template or the ID of the template or the label of the template. And once I have those custom labels, then I return them to the UI. So this is pretty much the story of how I took, what initially looks like a very raw API, and using other APIs like the tooling API and the metadata API, I was able to make it very useful by enhancing the results that it provides, by finding more metadata types, or by expanding on the information that it gives me. For example, I was able to see if an Apex class is using the field for reading or for inserting data. And for that, we have this method here, get info for Apex class. So the Apex classes are returned by the metadata component dependency, but the information about whether they're used for reading or writing is a custom logic by HappySoup. So that's pretty much the story. I hope you enjoyed this. There are a couple of resources that are important. So the metadata component dependency documentation can be found at this URL, which is essentially this page that you see here. And then you can find the source code for HappySoup at github.com/pgonzalesnetwork/sfdc HappySoup. The last thing I wanted to say is that there is a chatter group for the dependency API. And as I mentioned earlier, unfortunately, the API has been in beta for a good while. There is very little support on this API. And recently somebody asked if the API was coming along. And we were able to initiate a movement called the GA Please movement, which essentially all these people came here to support HappySoup and let the Salesforce product manager know that this API should become generally available as soon as possible because it really provides value to the community. So that's pretty much it. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'm happy to answer any questions now. Thank you very much.
Hey, Desmond, I think you're muted.
Oh, it was a great product. It was a great presentation, Paulo. Thank you. So now you're in person. Let's look at some of the questions that was posed by some of our attendees that is in this session itself. So as I mentioned, you can actually post it your live Q&A questions there. We will try to answer most or apparently all of it within the time limit they have. So first on the list, which is we've voted with almost 3 votes or 4 votes, is what is the roadmap of HappySoup IO? So our friend actually put a safe harbor just in case that we know that you're working on this. Yeah. Maybe you
Right
want to
now,
tell
I
that.
don't. Yeah, I don't have anything big in the roadmap. Simply because what you see right now is the best version of HappySoup that I've been able to come up with. Like before, when I released it, it was very different. It was a very simple UI. You didn't have bulk impact analysis. There was no field utilization. It was very simple. So in the roadmap before, I had these sort of big ideas of doing bulk impact analysis, having the UI be much better, allowing for well, all these things that you see on the screen now. That
Mm.
wasn't there like 6 months ago. So right now, the focus is just on expanding the impact analysis capability. So if somebody tells me on GitHub that, hey, this metadata type is not supported, or I couldn't find where it was used, then that's my focus is on expanding those capabilities.
That's good. That's good. I think it is a revolving product by itself.
Yeah.
Okay, so that is very, very, I mean, it's continuous enhancement. I mean, from hearing from you there. So the next question that one of our attendees posed was that, is HappySoup ready for future updates of Salesforce? And yeah, yeah. Maybe I'll comment on that.
Yeah. So yes and no. It depends on user feedback, right? So one of the things that happened recently is so Salesforce introduces these new standard objects, right? Like for the omni-channel, right? There are some new standard objects, or for um, yeah, so they're like CPQ stuff that I may not be aware of because I just simply don't work with those tools all the time. So generally, it won't evolve, I guess, on its own to support those new features or new standard objects. So I need feedback from the community on that, and the community has been great, letting me know, what type of things are not supported. So if you guys see something that is not there, whether it's a standard field that you cannot find, or a totally brand new object from a different Salesforce feature that is just not there, I'd be more than happy to have a chat, and I'm happy to see what I can do to enable that.
Wow, that's good. That's good. I think based on harnessing the power of Ohana and also on the community, on the Trailblazer one, you actually get more feedback from there and you enhance your product even more. Okay, so the next question is it a free tool or is there any cost implied? Like, some of them will tell you like it's a free 30 days and, after that you have a trial. Is this product the same way? Maybe you want to comment on that?
So the trial lasts for 34 years. After that, I cannot guarantee, but at least, yeah. No, it is
Okay.
100% free. And the easy answer, to be entirely honest, is, well, it's two. One, I don't have the technical infrastructure to make it paid, right? Because to make something paid, you need to lock features by subscription, right? If
Yeah,
someone has a subscription, then you open up those features.
right.
That's a lot of technical overhead that honestly I have no idea how to build. Like I
All
have
right.
no clue where would I store the user information, how much they're paying, and how to lock features. I have no idea how to do it. And even if I did, uh, I, as a Salesforce user, I wouldn't pay for HappySoup. And the reason for that is it's not something that you use every day. It's not like you
Yeah.
spend all day on HappySoup doing your work and without it you couldn't do it. It's something that you do every once in a while, like, hey, I need to see where this is used, and okay, it's used there, and then you move on with what's happening in your life, right? So I find it hard to justify, especially because it's just Salesforce, right? And it doesn't cover everything. So there are other tools out there that provide much better impact analysis capabilities because they'll cover many more metadata types that I don't cover. Or there are some tools out there that will cover even other apps, right? Like impact analysis in Salesforce and Slack and MuleSoft. So those things are probably definitely worth paying for big teams. But for HappySoup, just very focused on Salesforce, only limited support to metadata types. So it's not something that I think people would want to spend money on, to
Cool.
be honest.
That's a great explanation of yeah. So as long as the products is there and if there are new enhancement, I think Paulo will actually do it as exploration and to put in those so-called the standard fields or that they are there inside system itself. Okay,
Yeah.
so the next question we have is this similar with MailSoft or Lilai Homey? Or
No, so MuleSoft and Boomi are integration tools, right? So like to connect Salesforce with an external data source or do API calls or things like that. This is all about metadata visualization. It's all about understanding the dependencies in your org. And that's where the name HappySoup actually comes from, right? That the term HappySoup was coined by Salesforce in one of their Trailhead modules, and it just means the entire sort of mess of metadata that you have in the org, right? It's all combined. And I think if you think about a soup, you cannot take ingredients out of a soup.
yeah,
It's all mixed. Once it's there,
yeah,
you're done. So
correct.
um, this is all about sort of breaking down that happy soup and understanding that okay, my org is not just a mess of metadata. There's actually some chunks of dependency that I can visualize or that I can rationalize about. So no, it doesn't allow for any sort of integration capabilities or anything like that. It's all about um, metadata visualization and management.
Cool. Great answer. So basically, it's not a MuleSoft product or the delivery who product itself as well. So that's good. Next, someone actually asked about so when you talk about API going to be converted into API driven architect, is it into microservice? I think that's a new question that just popped up in. Uh, so,
Um,
so yeah, so it's talking about when you talk about API, right? That is going in to be converted into API driven. Uh, is it API driven architect like something like microservices?
well, I'm not sure I understand the question, but I will talk a little bit about it, just a few seconds about the architecture. So,
Yeah,
so the node module in JavaScript that you saw is actually uh, the core API of HappySoup. So HappySoup is actually divided in different services or node modules. So like the field utilization that you saw, where I can show you where a field is used in the data, record types, how many records are populated. That's one JavaScript package. Then the actual metadata visualization, or like the metadata, where is it used? That's a whole different package. And then the UI as well that you will see on the screen, that's a whole different package as well. So it's three different things that I bring together. Um, however, they are hosted in Heroku, and they work as a whole. It's like a monolith in Heroku. So it doesn't really use like an events architecture or microservices. It is divided logically into modules, but once it's deployed to Heroku, it's one chunk of functionality.
All right. Okay, I think that will be our last question. Okay, so Paulo, thank you so much for this entire presentation. It's really very fruitful. I myself, as I was telling Paulo at the backstage, or in our separate rooms, that I actually using HappySoup to do certain things as well. So I'm a user itself as well. So thank you everyone for attending. So before you exit this meeting, right? Can you all please help us to improve by completing the surveys, the session survey of each session? You will gain points by submitting the survey, and also you will also earn points when you visit the exhibition booth, or you connect your friends in that meeting hub. You connect them and engage them in sessions in your live Q&A. This also will give you points. So at the end of the day, there will be some gamification points that will be awarded to everyone that is. So
Thanks
just want to
everyone
thank everybody for attending,
joining us.
and we'll see you in the next session. And thank you, Paulo. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you everyone. I appreciate your time. Talk to you later. Bye-bye.
Bye.